I am joined now by the immeasurably talented Conor Mitchell. The founder and artistic director of the Belfast Ensemble, Conor is one of the most prolific composers and writers to come out of Northern Ireland. He is an established orchestral concert composer and librettist and has been awarded many accolades, including Best Score at the New York Music Theatre Festival, the Styles and Drew Songwriters Award, and the Arts Foundation Fellowship Award for Composition, awarded by Sir Richard Eyre, among many others. His work has been presented all over the world, from Belfast to London and New York. We're delighted to have you with us today, Conor. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too. Thanks very much for coming. So first of all, we'll start off nice and easy. Can you tell me how you found your way into music and theatre? What was your journey?
I think about that quite a lot, actually, because I straddle both worlds. It's very weird in that my day-to-day kind of language is music and musicians. So I spend most of my day thinking about how I write music and stuff like that. But the reality is my tribe is theatre people. So I suspect lots of people are in that position. When we were all very, very young, you were either in the practice room or you were in the rehearsal room. And even though I was a musician, I was always in the rehearsal room. It was the drama and actors and the stage and the rush of the audience and learning lines and telling stories, to me, was the much more connective thing, really. But being a musician, I suppose, was just my language. I mean, that was just what I did. You know, I had aspirations of being an actor and stuff like that, but unfortunately, I'm too neurotic to be looked at by other people. So that's really what happened. So my life basically was a coming together of those two performative planets. And while that is fantastic in that it allows me to work in musical theatre and opera and straddle many, many different worlds, it's also a bit paralysing because I'm kind of a hermaphrodite, you know.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the easiest thing to be is, in our business, is, you know, the world's best costume designer or the world's best wig maker or the world's best set designer or lyricist or the world's best person who writes, you know, musical theatre songs in 4/4. What the world finds very odd is people that are easily bored, that want to do other things. And I'm one of those people. So that can be as bad as it is good.
I totally agree with you, because I think I'm one of those people as well. I constantly get bored very easily. And that leads me nicely to my next question, which is, you've often described yourself as a musical dramatist or music theatre maker. Can you tell me a little bit about your use of those terms and what you mean by that?
Because I am equally as interested in musical theatre as I am interested in grand opera, contemporary opera, and song cycle. I mean, I have as much fondness for Gilbert and Sullivan as I do for the works of Thomas Adès. I mean, anything that tells a story that is true to itself, like I love Calamity Jane. I love Little Shop of Horrors. What I don't like are things that are disingenuous to their form. You know, and God knows I've written enough of them, you know, myself in my youth. But all of those are dramatical forms of musical storytelling. And I suppose I got really, really bored with somebody saying, you write musicals, or, oh, you write opera. And then this terrible debate of what's the difference between a musical and opera. And I just got so bored of having that conversation again and again that I just went, I'm a dramatist. I just write a lot of music when I do it. So everything that in the world that I create, people tell their stories with music. So I just said I'm a musical dramatist. I would still call myself that today, but people even have difficulty with that because somebody actually once said to me, but are you an opera musical dramatist or are you a musical?
That's It's like
I
there's
give
an
up.
inherent need that you have to be one specific thing and you have to be in that box, and that's where
Yeah,
you need to stay. And people can't cope if you're like, but I like to do both those things, you
but
know.
it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in America. Like in
No.
America, you have like the composer Nico Mui, who's a little bit younger than me, kind of an inheritor of the Philip Glass sensibility in the minimalist world. He has commissions one day with the Met, and then the next he's writing a film score, and then he's working on an album with Bjork, and it's really celebrated. And the Americans love, like Leonard Bernstein was writing, West Side Story, as we know, and then the next day he was writing, a piece for the LA Phil. And in America, that's wonderful. They love the invention of that, but in the UK and Ireland, they find that very, very, very odd. In the UK, you must be the best person that makes the buttons.
Yeah.
But you can't make the buttons and the coat. And I get that. It's a kind of people use this phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, and that pisses the shit out of me. Because it doesn't take into consideration the huge amount of work that has to happen in theatre these days. Also,
I suppose it's a little bit untruthful, really, isn't it, to say that? Because, like, show me a theatre maker who hasn't done more than one job. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also,
Yeah.
it's we've been doing it since time immemorial. There is a reason we say Renaissance man. We have, I think, in the theatre had men and women that were actors and producers and scriptwriters, dramatists and costume makers on the road, driving the van, raising the money, selling the tickets, making the cups of tea, being Cleopatra, then, out the back, moving on to the next show. That's how we worked for years and years and years. But something happened, I think, with the formalization of venues and with director theatre, where, of course, a director wants the best carpenter in the business, and then they want the best button maker, because then they can create a team of brilliance. But what that does get rid of, I think, is the concept of the theatrical entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And weirdly, because of 21st century sensibilities and the fact that we now have to be as adept, like as you're doing right now, we have to be as brilliant at creating our own brands and creating our own content and film and our own marketing. And like when I started, we used to have, when you were training in composition, you were taught that if you were very successful, you would have a little person that came along and copied out all your scores.
Yeah.
Called an amanuensis. And then you would have a publisher who would do the final copy and fair copy. That's all gone. You have to be able to do all of that yourself in a very kind of 17th century manner. So I think we're coming round to that sensibility. And the more I look at young writers and directors, they are entrepreneurs. Young directors are now, they're putting on their shows. Half of them are writing them. Many composers in theatre are also sound designers. I mean, that was unheard of 20 years ago.
It'll be interesting to see, maybe now is the time that that's all shaken up again, and that we kind of look at how we're making things and reassess all of those assumptions that we've had previously.
These huge venues that I think needed to be built in the 70s and the 80s, but you might have had quite small enterprises like Stratford East Theatre or Southwark Playhouse, whatever, quite small boutique theatres like the Donmar that became these huge institutions, and perhaps quite rightly, but suddenly you have a theatre that has 120 permanent staff. So they've been driven by the government to be as dependent on their bar sales or renting out their rehearsal room to yoga classes as they are to selling tickets. It means everything's top heavy.
Absolutely.
The slightest knock and the whole thing tumbles.
Which is what we're seeing now.
Yeah, because they haven't got the revenue, they haven't got the yoga lady, and they haven't got the coffee cups. Where I think that has a huge a devastating effect, is that to stabilize the industry, you must stabilize the organizations. But
Yeah.
nobody is stabilizing the people that are the artistic body of those organizations, and that's the freelance
Yeah.
sector.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to what you were talking about doing all the different kinds of whether it's like it's an opera or a musical, like the scope of your work is incredible, right? You do orchestra, opera, musical, scores, everything. When you sit down to write, what's your starting point? Like, what makes one story this is going to be an opera or this is going to be a musical, or does it sort of reveal itself as you write?
No, nothing ever reveals itself as I write something. Ever. I I generally envisage the end point of something before I start. And I mean the end, like people leaving the auditorium or leaving the theater, or the concert hall, or pressing stop on a recording. I know what subject I'm going to write about, and I know the context. So I always try and imagine the end point. So, like, if someone's leaving the auditorium, what do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel they've just watched this epic thing that had to have a symphony orchestra? Or do I want them to be totally uplifted and go, oh my God, I've watched this tiny story with a huge jazz band? And I try and imagine the spell that's happening in an auditorium, and then I kind of work backwards, and then I plan the whole thing out to structures. So then I just fill in. But there's always a very, very, very worked out structure. I would never start on page one and just see how it goes. That would frighten the life out of me. Like, I cannot bear improvisation.
Yeah, really?
I can't bear. There's a composer over here called Brian Irvine who is like, he's a total genius. He's an amazing composer, but he has passages where he just writes improvise for 12 bars.
Gosh.
And I would have a nosebleed at that because of the lack of control. I I need to know where something is reaching a peak and then where it's coming down, so I can pull them back. So I'm playing a dance with the audience the entire time. So locking something down to, let's say, 1 hour or 2 hours or a very specific structure of 15 minutes, I need to know that parameter, and then I will dance my dance within it. But it's normally highly worked out.
So when you sit down to write, where does your inspiration come from? Where do the melodies come from? Like, like you've talked about, kind of what you think about the audience leaving and what feeling they want. But when you sit down at your keyboard or with your pencil or whatever, where does that inspiration come from? Is it text, lyrics, notes?
Well, they're all different for different things. So if you're writing, let's say, a contemporary opera, or let's say the piece that I'm writing at the minute, which is Latin liturgical mass, but it's for the Ulster Orchestra. So what I'm taking is the Latin mass, so the Kyrie, the Gloria, and all those things, and then I'm infusing, I think, the Russian pre-being jailed rap of Pussy Riot. So
oh my God,
I think
amazing.
that's going to be layered over the orchestra with 4 opera singers and a choir. And that's for a big queer festival in Belfast with the Ulster Orchestra and, digital projection. In those cases, the text must exist first. And likewise, in a contemporary opera, the text would exist first. And then I respond purely musically. Because I have much more freedom with the words, and I have to create an internal musical life to each syllable. So a single syllable can be wrapped, in 100 notes. Whereas in a musical, it's a slightly different process. Musical settings of words are usually monosyllabic, mostly, and they're conversational. So the music is a slave in that instance to the meter of the lyrics. And in those instances, I write music and lyrics at exactly the same time. I've never set music to a musical theatre lyric that I've already written.
Gotcha. So when you're, because you've worked with Mark Ravenhill, haven't you? So how does
Yes.
that process work? How is that different? Or
Well,
is it
none of
all?
them were musicals.
So it was scoring.
Yes. In each of those instances, we were driving Mark to get the libretti finished first, and then I would respond.
Gotcha.
Where in the case of 10 Plagues, which is basically 16 poems, Mark wrote 16 poems, and then I found a way to create song structures out of the poems, but in a very Schubert kind of way.
Yeah.
So I went back to the old models, Schubert and Winterreise and all of those. And in a way, I suppose all the classical stuff is easier to qualify because it is very text, and then the music sits on top of it, and then the form is, responding to the king music. But in musical theatre, it's very, very different. In musical theatre, you can start a song and you can say, you lock down your structure and the character beats within that, and where one character must have dominance and one must be subservient, and you push your numbers in to that kind of structure. Like I use a lot of post-it notes, and I'll have a really massive post-it note, and I'll say, right, that's the number in the first 10 minutes, first 20 minutes, that's the number that needs to be dominant. And I might start with like one line, or what you'd call the gestus of that song. Like in the musical that you worked on, Have a Nice Life, there's a song called Old Fashioned Romance. So the only lyric I knew when I sat down to write that was An Old Fashioned Romance.
Yeah.
And then you just keep going in a kind of Cole Porter sensibility. Start with the last line and then list the song through, and something will come. But that's the way Steve Sondheim writes. And it's how you come up with the most conversational, off-the-cuff human lyrics.
Absolutely. And can you tell me about your connection with Sondheim?
Well, look, that's quite loose. I mean, I was a very different person many years ago, and Have a Nice Life, our group as it's now called, did a brief stint in New York, and word of my work had kind of filtered through to Steve, and he ended up being invited to see it. And I remember he was he turned up and he was in a few rows in front of me, and I was being terribly Irish at the back, saying of course I could never introduce myself. And there was a very brusque kind of New York choreographer who literally lifted me by the collar and pushed me. That's Stephen Sondheim. Literally pushed me. And I ended up saying, I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Sondheim. I've been impersonating you for years. And I kind of got to know him through that. But it's more of a, like, you just knowing a person. And I think he wouldn't have mentored me in any way, because that's not what Steve does. I think he's very generous in just giving people his time and letting them into his orbit. And there's a kind of person who perhaps defines themselves by that relationship with him. And then there are other people who just go, look, my work is my work. I spent years thinking I was the next Stephen Sondheim. And then I think when I was close to maybe becoming something like that, it freaked me out. I don't want to be the next Stephen Sondheim. I want to be like the next Conor Mitchell. So that was but actually he would be the first person to congratulate you for that.
Yeah.
The last thing Steve Sondheim wants is people impersonating him, and God knows many of us have tried for centuries. But he is one of the greatest theatrical minds of the century, easily.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that a lot of people I think everybody goes through that phase, though, where they try and emulate somebody that they respect and admire, when really they are just better off trusting their own voice and becoming themselves. I mean, nobody's ever going to be Sondheim except for Sondheim. And I think in the same way, nobody's ever going to be Conor Mitchell except Conor Mitchell,
Yeah, but you need to own that. And Benjamin Britten was very good on this front, because Britten tread a very kind of neoclassical pastoral sensibility for much of his career, when other composers in Europe were going nuts and smashing plates and tonalism was gone and all this. And Britain said, I do not believe in originality at all costs. You know, and I think Sondheim would say the same, that they have been true to their own visions, but they have always kept within familiar parameters and then expanded a little bit and then come back. They're playing a dance with their audience that I've really admired, and I've always tried to kind of emulate that. So I've never gone so far as to like divorce myself from the work of Sondheim completely, or the work of Britain. A lot of my stuff is very similar to like late Britain cantata work and stuff. And, you know, I'm very proud of all those links. Like I really, really cherish them. What I don't want to do is throw the baby out with the bathwater, but likewise, I have my own voice and I like embracing that. But, you know, that's one of the things about musical theatre. Musical theatre does try and define you. It says you're either... It can be quite nonsense. You know, musical theatre is possibly the most snobbish, unsnobbish art form on planet Earth. You know, the Sondheim people look down on the Lloyd Webber people, who look down on the Schwartz people, who look down on the Disney people, who look down on the Rodgers and Hammerstein people. It's like, God, you know. True. Whereas possibly the most sophisticated dramatists that ever worked in musical theatre are Rodgers and Hammerstein. You know,
the reason they're popular.
Well, the dramatical point of every Rodgers and Hammerstein musical is more sophisticated sociologically than every single thing Stephen Sondheim ever wrote. You know, Rodgers and Hammerstein are I suppose Hammerstein, not so much Rodgers, are responding to the society they're living in perfectly, and they write a very Americanized, appropriate version that can speak. Like, you know, people watch Oklahoma and they forget the fact that the baddie is called Judd Fry, you know, written, you know, close to the Second World War, which is German for free Jew, you know, written by two Jewish men, the town gang up and lynch the free Jew. You know, there are these huge social messages in all of their work. Like, you know, everyone was given a free ticket in New York to go and see Carousel, you know, during World War II. And most of the audience would have been in New York for the first time on their way to get a boat to Europe to fight in the Second World War. They bring their sweetheart. And at the end of Act One, you have a big song called You'll Never Walk Alone, which is, if you're going to tell someone you love them, treat them nice and tell them now. You know, and it's the only song that uses no rhyme in their entire canon. So they're doing what Brecht and Weill were doing parallelly in Berlin 10 years earlier, but in a much more sophisticated bubblegum way that nobody really notices. So it's agit-prop at a distance. Like, I love the work of Rodgers and Hammerstein. I think it's so clever, and it's so of its time and its society and true to itself, that I think lots of it is totally flawless. I'm just, you know, totally besmirched by the musical theatre people today, but I think to their cost.
It does go to show, though, just how important it is that we remember that we should always look at the context in which things were created as much as we look at the material itself. Like, just as like that story about Carousel, I've never thought about that, and now you're after saying it, and it's like, oh God, you know, it's that whole extra layer. And yeah, context is
it's like Oklahoma. Oklahoma is such an amazing piece because, you know, at its core, Oklahoma is about a province in Texas that believes it should be its own state. You know, so it's about nationalism. And it's just the farmer and the cowman and blah, 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 blah. But it's people arguing about the fact, you know, that two men want one woman and one of them ends up dead because the town don't like him because he doesn't fit in. And at the end, they all celebrate the fact that this small place becomes its own state. This is at a time when Germany, you know, is annexing part of Europe, and we're all talking about nationalism. But in the Rodgers and Hammerstein context, instead of sending out a big message and saying, nationalism is a profound evil, but they're kind of saying, remember, we have done this and discussed nationalism in our own kind of way. Maybe not to the same horrific ends, but they're discussing it. The difference between the work of Rodgers and Hammerstein and Brecht and Weil is in the Rodgers and Hammerstein context, not many people are understanding it. It's just raising the subject in the way that something like Frozen, which we instantly kind of dismiss as adults, is teaching every child in the world that it's okay to just go to an ice palace and not give a shit about anyone else. Just be a weirdo. That's okay.
Absolutely.
That's the message, and that's actually very sophisticated.
Yeah.
And socially engineered art. I think it's wonderful.
Absolutely, and I think it is something that Disney is doing more and more of in a lot of the stuff that they've. I know we're not supposed to really like Disney, but in a lot of their stuff, they do have those messages. And definitely in more recent years, we've seen that they're a lot more conscious of the kind of message that they put out there because they're so popular.
But there's a huge positive in that, which is that it's a kind of taciturn acknowledgement of the power of art.
Yeah.
Mass amounts of children watching a singular story has the ability to either brainwash or to change in a positive manner the way they look at the rest of society. So, but only art really can do that.
And speaking of education, you're a big believer in education and empowering young people. Like you've very strong connections with the Youth Music Theatre. You've done a lot of workshops and stuff. I know you were at Lambda, and certainly when I was there, I directed one of your shows, Have a Nice Life, which we talked a little bit about earlier for my showcase. And you were so good to me when I was doing that. Can you tell me about that, like about your belief in empowering young people and finding their creative voices?
Well, I did. It's very weird because when you're starting out as a composer or any kind of dramatist, or actually a director, actually a huge amount of your income generation when you're starting out or just making a living is facilitating workshops, working in drama schools, the odd bit of teaching. So it becomes this thing that starts you off, and it's so paradoxical because you come out of education and the first thing you generally end up doing as a theatre person is working in education. And then most of us transition out of that. And I think it's really important to kind of say, well, actually, that has a real purpose. And if you've had a really good teacher, like I did have one really seismically important drama teacher when I was at school called Joan McPherson. And she completely changed my understanding of what was possible, in that she was the first person to say, okay, do it. Have the whole class. If you want to do that show, write it and go and do it. And I just thought that was like unbelievable. That if you wanted to write a show or a song, you could just do it and other people would sing it. I mean, that was a total revelation for me. And she just let me, I suppose, fail better. And then I did, I helped found Youth Music Theatre, which is now British Youth Music Theatre, ran by John Bromwich. And they've been going for a long time. We're one of the biggest commissioners of new work in the country. And I wrote a Connections play, which I totally, that was one of the highlights of my career. And I've written for the Ulster Youth Orchestra, symphonic works for them. And I'm currently re-editing a children's opera that's in co-production with Northern Ireland Opera. And that's going to open at the Belfast Children's Festival in March for symphony orchestra and cast. So as we speak, after this, I'm Googling images for people in stilts to see how I can make people look taller on stage.
Incredible, yeah.
But I think that's really important. I know it's really cliche to say give back, but actually I think that is incredibly valuable. And it is amazing how energizing young minds are. It just is, as long as there's a balance. I have seen people who have become consumed with that area of their life. I've seen people been slightly destroyed by the fact that that has become 100% of their creative being. where they never wanted it to be. You know, but paradoxically, I know people that have always wanted it to be 100% of their being, and they're totally fine. I always think that's a merry dance you need to have with yourself. But I think it's very important in your creative output to be continuously working with students, you know, and just being inspired, and then co-inspiring them. I think it's just class.
I think it's a great way to keep yourself on your toes. Like, I find that personally, like whenever I'm working with young people, they keep me on my toes, you know, and it's I learn sometimes as much from them as they learn from me.
But also like writing for young audiences, like particularly writing. I've written a few works for very small children. I wrote an adaptation of The Incredible Book-Eating Boy by Oliver Jeffers, where I found there were all these talks about, you know, how do you theatrically represent eating a book, and how do we do this? Because we as adults were going, because of course you can't eat a book. You know, it needs to be this and this. And then you put it in front of children, and they're like, yeah, you can eat a book. Yeah. Like, okay, but it's just that easy. I mean, they are prepared to go to this utterly theatrical place that we are trying to find constructs, and, you know, oh, well, it must be a group of storytellers that are telling a story, and the set must be a book, and all this bullshit, you know. Just do the show. Kids will go with it. They're a very, very challenging, brilliant audience.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned one of your highlights there, which was doing the connections thing. But I mean, there must have been many highlights in your career. I mean, you received rather the Arts Council of Northern Ireland Major Individual Artist Award, mouthful, in 2016. I mean, that must have been an incredible moment for one.
Oh yeah, no, that was great. Look, I came back to Northern Ireland around, I think it was when you were doing Have a Nice Life, around 2012, and that was with a very specific agenda, which was to get more back into contemporary classical, and to find a house where I could have a grand piano, which my dad very kindly supported me in, and just go back to writing, because what I noticed was I was missing detail in my piano parts, and this really bugged me. Like, I cannot stand vagary in piano accompaniments in any respect. Like, I feel I have a nosebleed when I say it. So I needed to move country to do this. So I got out of London, and I spent a lot of time by myself and refocused on the detail of musical accompaniment and the function of what was happening underneath the melodic line. And, you know, then lots of things happened, blah, blah, blah. Life got in the way. But all along that entire process, the one major supportive construct from the industry was the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. And they get a lot of hassle. You know, all arts councils, I think are being pecked to death by 1,000 tiny birds. But the reality is, for all the faults that you will get with an arts council or with a governmental fund like that, they are the good guys. And they were brilliant to me, and they stepped in and they gave me that award. And, you know, it was amazing. It turned a lot of stuff around. And that was the award that helped me find the Belfast Ensemble.
Wow.
I basically was supposed to be writing something, this big canon of work, and I secretly kind of put the money in to founding a company. I financed myself, taking a lot of time off and spending the money on trying to write this new piece. And I got a theatre, and I started directing my own work, and I started doing the lights with, you know, a lighting designer called Simon Bird, and learning all about that. And that became the Belfast Ensemble, which is what I run now. So yeah, that was great. They're very behind everything.
Yeah, I suppose there's something in the recognition, like the home recognition of that they've said, yeah, you've done good. You know, we're going to help you out here, and we're going to recognize the work that you've done and that you're hopefully continuing to do.
Yeah, that's nice, you know, and I think, but, you know, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. I mean, we're dealing in very difficult financial times, and Northern Ireland, our arts spend per head is 6 pence. You know, we're in the Republic of Ireland, I think it might be 12, 15 per per year, which I mean I know is a minuscule amount of money, but when you consider in Northern Ireland, it's 50% of every other part of the UK. It's tricky when actually I think of all of those societies, the one within these islands that probably does need more access to arts and professional music sector and musical theatre and all that would be Northern Ireland, because we're geographically quite remote. And now we're trapped in between two jurisdictions. You know, are we in Europe? Are we in the UK? Who bloody knows what's happening? And I think that's where art can come and save the day. So, I mean, I would be a big advocate for an increase in the art spend, you know, in the city of Belfast.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll have to see what happens, because as you said, who knows what's going to happen? Nobody knows. So kind of like every artist has highs and lows and struggles, and, you know, touching on the future now, which nobody knows what's going to happen. What advice would you give to anybody watching now who'd love to be a music theatre maker as yourself in the future?
I think it's finding your tribe. You know, that is the most difficult thing to do. If you decide you want to create shows, and I mean, you know, whether that be opera or musical theatre, just shows that happen on a stage, so outside of a pit, you know, so that are going to involve actors, and, you know, director will come in and it will have lights, and you want to create a certain spell in an auditorium, you really need a tribe that's going to support you in that vision. You know, you cannot do that by yourself. You know, so it's pushing in any direction you can to find similar voices and people that have a similar lust to get that thing happening. If you have to find them in a bloody bar, go to the bar to get them, you know. But theatre people are brilliant like that. Like, every theatre person is at their heart somebody who ran away to join the circus. I mean, they just are. They just are. We all have the same story. We were all in school and we were all these extroverted little children who, you know, jumped out from behind the sofa and went boo, you know. And something happened in our early teenage years and we all started getting trains to the capital city and being in youth theatres, and then we suddenly all had this different group of friends than our school friends. And then we all graduated to these cities, and then we all found ourselves in bars and fringe theatres and at the Edinburgh Festival, and then we were all at the National Theatre and all this crap, you know. But we're still children who ran away to join the circus. So theatre people meet other theatre people, and I would say run to that. Totally run to that sensibility, because the theatre gang is there for life. It will change and people will come and go and friends will go, but theatre people is theatre people. You know, I think there's nobody like them on planet Earth. They used to bury us at crossroads with, you know, stakes through our heart because, you know, we were thieves and vagabonds and prostitutes and thieves, and I think we still are. I think we still are.
Sometimes we have to be.
Yeah. I mean, I fundamentally disagree with actors and theatre people being given knighthoods and damehoods. I mean, I don't think we're that kind of people. I think we have to break rules. I think we are entertainers, you know, who put on costumes and write shows, and then we try and change the world through what we do. So find that network of like-minded people who are willing to sleep on the streets of Edinburgh to get a show up, you know, or are willing to do a show for 50 quid a year. You know, that's how you start. And either you can, you know, run to that, or you can be timid, and I would say run to it. And if somebody wants to put on new work, support them. Not all new work will work. You know, it generally takes a writer until their 40s. It took Beethoven until his 40s to really solidify his sound. Steve Sondheim was writing Company at like what, 41? You know, Judith Weir's kind of best chamber, you know, operatic work is all her later work. You know, Philida Lloyd's greatest stuff, I think, directing wise, was all in her 40s. people have to go through their 20s and their 30s and find who they are and make all their mistakes and piss everyone off and then find their voice. And I think just do it all together as a group.
Yeah.
And you will come out the other side.
Incredible.
Oh, thanks very much. I mean,
yeah, no, it is incredible voice, and I think I always liken it. I agree with you. I think we're a bunch of children. Like to use that word, players. We are playing, like completely, and it's actually. I feel really inspired now having heard you say that, because to think, God, there's time yet, there's hope yet. The best work ahead of me.
There is. I always say, if you want something done, ask a theatre person. No matter how flaky the world, like if you're sat with your family and you have a problem, they will always say, my family will always say, talk to your sister. Because she doesn't work in theatre, so she's very pragmatic. She would get stuff done. But theatre people just get on with stuff and do it. I mean, they'll just literally get in the car and drive you there, and then they'll lift stuff, or nobody ever had the rent when I was in my 20s. Nobody could ever afford anything. We were very, pragmatic. My friend Shawnette was always like re-sewing clothes, because, theatre people are fundamentally good people. Actors are fundamentally good people who, want everybody to love them and like them. Writers want people to adore their work, and they want to tell human stories about people they've met. So I think there's nobody like theatre people. So I would say lean on them, and everybody just needs to make it through and just wait. And look, all of this coronavirus stuff will pass. Theatre people have survived the Great Plague. So we will survive this.
It's been on my mind a lot, that I suddenly have this whole new appreciation. I remember being in history of theatre class and learning about how the plague shut down all the playhouses and all of this, and kind of going, that's a silly thing that happened in the past. And now I find myself really thinking about that and going, oh my God, I understand how Shakespeare must have felt at the time. A whole new appreciation for it, but the theatre did survive then, and it absolutely will survive now.
It evolves and it grows and it comes back in a different form. Look, the Nazis banned jazz music. Stalin banned, trumpet notes over a B flat. So did Adolf Hitler. The music of Mendelssohn was completely outlawed. Music and theatre find a way to squeeze out. They do. They will all. You cannot suppress it. Because every day there's another child born who is jumping from the back of a sofa shouting boo to their parents. You just cannot fight that instinct. So I think it will evolve. It'll be different for a little bit, but it will just make everyone stronger, more resilient, and it fundamentally will update the narrative of our society. And I think that's a positive. I really do think that's positive.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Like, nearly like we've hit reset, and hopefully the system will reboot, and hopefully better than before. Conor, that's all the questions I have. Thank you so much. Yeah, it is as happy as I would be to sit and talk to you for hours more. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to me today, and some brilliant advice there at the end there. Thank you so much.
That's all right. Thank you. I've got love to Carlo.
Oh, thank you.
This is Belfast. Belfast seems a wee bit sunnier, I have to say.
That's well, actually, I've actually blinds down because of the glare of the sun. It's actually a scorcher outside.
I'm going to say the sun moves north. The sun.
Yeah.